a few months ago, just watching the war unfold in between Russia and Ukraine, one was tempted to believe that once again the old order asserted itself, and a new global order was that we want um, might have to take a back seat. But over the past couple of months, uh, I have reversed my own opinion on this matter, and what I see is um, a renewed determination to put on the ground elements of a new global order. Um, Let me explain. It's not merely the Indo-Pacific as a geographic space has been very well alluded to and talked about in great detail. Um, the Indo-Pacific as a strategic space uh, requires a little more attention. The Indo-Pacific didn't happen out of nowhere. As you all know, it started from the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's address to the Indian Parliament back in 2007, where he talked about the confluence of two seas. But that evolved later. It is important to see when it evolved and when it attained a new level. And I would say that it is not merely the US-China relationship that defined the growth of the Indo-Pacific. It is also the changing contours of the India-China relationship that defined the Indo-Pacific and its manifestation in the Quad. We talk less about the India-China relationship and much more about the US-China competition. China is, of course, 5 times India's size, but the fact that India has, over the past at least since 2010, I would say, been living with the unfortunate realization that that India growing and China growing would not be a smooth affair, that China would use pretty much all the elements in its possession to check India's rise. India came late to the party. India came late to this particular realization, and this came after several very high profile efforts to engage China, came at the cost of putting the border issue to the sidelines while we engaged them in other areas, including after several instances of Chinese incursions across India's borders, across the line of actual control. And this has happened in 2013, in 2014, in 2017 was Doklam, and of course in 2020, Chinese troops and Indian troops are ranged across the Himalayas, just hundreds of meters apart, in absolutely inhospitable conditions since 2020. And it's important for us to remember that, because yesterday was 2 years since India lost 20 men in the first ever hand-to-hand clash combat with Chinese troops on the border since 1962. And it's important to remember that, because the definition of the new global order, or the definition of the Indo-Pacific as the new strategic theater, is and will be defined by the investment that India puts into it. If we look at the Quad consists of three Cold War treaty allies plus India. If you flip the equation around, it is India that actually holds the key to the driver's key to the Quad, as well as to the strategic future of the Indo-Pacific. And I have written this on numerous occasions, that whither goes India, goes the Indo-Pacific. India has, over the past few years, defined its own strategic sphere. I go back to the year 2000, when former Prime Minister Vajpayee spoke about the Red Sea to Malacca Straits. In the subsequent decade, we have expanded our strategic space to the Western Pacific. And that is important, because it's not merely the Straits of Malacca that is an important area for us. It is the deeper engagement in the Indian Ocean space. And Indian Ocean for India has become a very important theater, both for economics as well as for strategic interests. It is there that India will exercise power, will project power. It is there that India will be the first responder. It is there that India will be a net security provider. And these are the elements of India's own Indian Ocean strategy. It is the reason why India is always first off the block to assist Mauritius, Madagascar, Seychelles, right now doing what we can to help Sri Lanka overcome its own crisis, Maldives. These are the areas where India will focus a lot of its attention. But I think it's also good to look at the larger picture that we are all trying to put together for a future global order. And that, in a sense, the core of that is defined by the Quad. The Quad comes together not merely in opposition or as a balancing factor to the rise of, not merely the rise of, but the aggressive rise, the expansionist rise of China. It also comes together because in the 21st century, it has become increasingly clear that global goods or global services or global commons are not serviced by yesterday's rules. There is a very good reason why the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework has come to sit on top of RCEP and CPTPP. Because at least 2 of the 4 members of the Quad realize or know that either the CPTPP or the RCEP do not work for them. Trade as we knew it, or the rules of trade free trade as we knew it, are no longer valid. It is no longer a sine qua non of global trade that market access has to be given. And here Ms. Prakash referred to some degree of deglobalization, and I think that is important. That is a reality that we all have to take into account. There is a Make America Great Again. There is an Atmanirbhar Bharat. There are countries, we will see that in Europe as well, when Europe takes a deeper look at itself and how it functions in an era where Russia will be closed off and China will be a systemic competitor. So Europe is redefining its own ways of trade. India certainly redefined its own ways of trade. India has always been a little wary of fully open trading systems, largely because it used to be because of non-competitiveness of India's industry, but lately much more to prevent China from using third country routes and other routes to enter India's markets without offering similar access to Indian goods and services into the Chinese market. We all like to talk about how China-India trade has increased during the pandemic. But if you just drill down just a very little, just below the surface, you would see how the figures are so deeply skewed against each other on one side. Another lesson from the pandemic, which influenced, I would say, very deeply the Quad's decision to start working on a new economic order, was the lack or the fact that supply chains that we had all taken for granted failed us during the pandemic, and it failed us quite spectacularly. Certainly for India, the lessons came early on in the pandemic when we could not access personal protection equipment from China. We realized that despite being known as a pharmaceutical superpower, we were heavily dependent on China for APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients. That when we needed ventilators, there was only one place to go to. When we needed oxygen concentrators, there was only one place to go to. And China over the 2 years, in fits and starts, has weaponized its own position in the supply chain. That was a huge learning where India was concerned. It was not India also realized the kind of activities that happened in the guise of investments, Chinese investments into India's tech sector. And from 2020, we have seen a distinct moving away, which was accelerated by by China's incursions in eastern Ladakh across the line of actual control. But we've seen India moving away by restricting investments from China in tech sectors. We have seen India moving away by restricting how much data mining China could do from India. And if you have been following this over the last 2 years, there is a distinct pattern in India's actions. Some of it you will see in a different scale being mirrored in the US, a lot of it being mirrored in Japan as well as Australia. The fact that China weaponized its commodities trade with Australia was a learning for India. All these little elements have gone into creating not just the Quad, not just the IPEF, but also the other elements of the Quad. If you go through the Quad for the last 2 years, it's vaccines, it's supply chains, it's critical minerals and technologies, climate change. These are the pillars of the new world, of the new global order. It is the ability or the accessibility of critical minerals from trusted sources that has become the definition for who you trade with and how you trade with them, which explains why IPEF was felt necessary. It's for many people who are obviously trade economists, they look at IPEF and say it's empty. There's nothing there. There is no market access. There are no lower tariffs. But it's a lot more than that. It's not going to be about lower tariffs. The lower tariffs will come much down the road. It's a lot more is about setting the rules for the new kind of economic engagement that we are beginning to see. It will take time, obviously, because these are really big economies. It's a very big space. So I would urge you to look much more carefully at these elements. Critical minerals, these are very important as you move to a renewable energy future, as we move to say electric vehicles, as we move to more semiconductor chips, and as you've seen, the weaponization of semiconductor chips has been a story that we have all followed for the last 2 years. On climate change too, what are the elements of climate change? What are the elements of adaptation, mitigation, adoption of new technologies, green financing, or a green transition from fossil fuel to a renewable future? All of this coming through collaborations at a plurilateral level. It speaks very strongly for a negative vote, shall we say, a vote of no confidence of the current existing multilateral order, because clearly the WTO doesn't work for us anymore. The UN does not work for us anymore. Neither does, frankly, as we saw in the first few months of the pandemic, there were questions about the World Health Organization. All of the, when we are looking at where the world is going, we do need to look at the signposts of the new world order. And I would say a lot of these are coming through in the signposts. I know that there's been a lot of discussion on the maritime issues, so I will not go there. Obviously, the Malabar would have been discussed. The very important agreement on the maritime domain awareness and illegal fishing that was signed during the Tokyo summit of the Quad. It has received far less attention than it should have, but in my view, it is actually one of the most important agreements that came through during the Tokyo summit, because illegal fishing is actually, in some senses, it is also a breach of sovereignty. And I think one of the things that the Quad would intend to do would be to help smaller countries fight illegal IUU, or illegal and unauthorized fishing, that we see in our waters, certainly in the Indo-Pacific region. The arrangement of the new order, and if the Quad is at the core of the new order, I would say we should also look at the peripheral arrangements that are slowly growing around the Quad. And I call these Quad pluses. There, at least in the past 2 years, I have counted at least two Quad plus meetings. The first was the Quad plus Vietnam, New Zealand, and South Korea, which was basically mainly on vaccines and supply chains. A second Quad plus meeting that I tracked was the Quad plus South Korea, Israel, and Brazil on vaccines and pharma technologies. In a sense, these are the kind of arrangements. I think the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has spoken quite extensively about how these plurilateral arrangements are few countries coming together with converging interests, with converging concerns. without anything that says that you cannot go and have a similar relationship with with another group of countries. And this flexibility and openness is a hallmark of this new thing that is emerging. Um, I think one of the aims of the certainly the Quad and other Indo-Pacific arrangements is to be able to provide better um, global goods. And we come to this space largely because of the US, which used to be the guarantor of global goods, no longer being so. No longer being the power that automatically is the first provider of global goods. You then are seeing countries like India, like Australia, like Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, coming together to to add their muscle and to add their resources to being the providers of these global goods. Now, unfortunately, given, of course, the strategic competition that we see in the Indo-Pacific region, these efforts are either mirrored or balanced or contained by the other side. And this, I say this for both ways, because as China works through its BRI and its other aid assistance, infrastructure efforts, you can see the Quad and other Indo-Pacific organizations coming through with their own their own versions of infrastructure assistance with a different criteria than what China offers. And we're going to see this contestation grow as the Quad gathers momentum. And as China, of course, China's set to become the next superpower in the next couple of years. So I think this arena will be an arena of contestation, certainly economic contestation, but a lot of it will be technological contestation. And therefore, the rules of the road on in the technology front is what will determine the rules that are adopted by the rest of the world. Would it be the Chinese variety? Would it be the Quad variety? And I think you can see already technology rules being worked on in all of these countries. EU, I would say, there are two areas of the world, I would say, that are in a bit of a quandary right now, and still yet to finally come to a conclusion about where they will be. One is the European Union, but the second is ASEAN. We all talk about ASEAN centrality, but ASEAN in many ways has been a passive receiver of both sides, of attention from both sides. I'm not sure how much longer this will continue, but my sense is that somewhere down the road, both EU and ASEAN will have to make some choices. This used to be actually said about India, that India with its strategic autonomy, etc., will have to make choices. While India has stuck to the mantra of strategic autonomy, I think events and realities on the ground, both security as well as economic, has forced India to make certain choices. Whether we articulate those choices or not in the manner that the West want us to articulate, but I think on the ground you can actually see the choices being made by India every day. How the new global order pans out in the Indo-Pacific is, of course, I would say it's too early to say, even though you can see so many elements of it being put on the ground. I'd say early because I don't think we have a definitive idea of how the major strategic contestation of this world will play out in the coming years. I would have been a lot more um, definitive in my assessment 4 months prior, but I'm not so definitive anymore, largely because of how the world will, how the Russia-Ukraine war will impact the rest of the world, and we haven't seen the last word on that yet. But it is certain that both in Washington, Delhi, Tokyo, and Canberra, certainly, we see a growing convergence on how the Indo Pacific should be defined and how it should be lived.